Welcome everyone to today's edition of Office Hour Live. This is our weekly show from the Community and Economic Development Unit of Central State University's Cooperative Extension Service. We are a land grant institution, and our goal with the Extension Service is to take the knowledge and the resources of the university out into service for the communities and the small businesses and the small scale farms and the people that call Ohio home. We're just really grateful that you have joined us. This is a show where we cover all things related to community and economic development. And we are very pleased to have with us here today Brian Treese, Executive Director for the Findlay-Hancock County Community Foundation, as well as Cassie Turner, the Community Engagement Officer, also with the foundation. And we're going to be talking today specifically about the concept of community engagement and deep engagement, really, and how you can use engagement as a strategy for helping your neighbors, your residents, and your community dream, and then follow through and act on that dream for a better future, a more prosperous future for their community. It can go all different directions, and we'll find that out today. But that engagement process is a way to make sure that any change that happens is sustained over the long haul because the community's behind it. And so here to unpack that concept and here to unpack that story, again, we're just so grateful to you, Brian and Cassie, for being with us.
Thanks for having us.
Yes.
Very much so.
Absolutely. So I thought maybe we could start off with the two of you. Maybe Brian, you could start us off with just sharing a little bit more about yourself and maybe something about the foundation to give us a little bit of context and maybe the county.
Right. So we are located in beautiful Northwest Ohio. Our population is split roughly half. There may be a bit of variance there between the city of Findlay and the rest of Hancock County. It is the Community Foundation's 30th anniversary this year. So anytime we get to talk to groups, we share a few highlights. 30 years ago, we started as a foundation under the Cleveland Foundation. And for a period of time, we got our footing and crossed some milestones to be able to become our own independent community foundation. That was always part of the intent. And we're really grateful for the Cleveland Foundation and all of their help through those beginning years. But in 30 years, what we've been able to accomplish together is we have involved 2,000 volunteers in our work, more than 6,500 donors, 10,500 grants, and we have awarded more than $71 million in grants in just 30 years. And I like to say that we are just getting started. It is important for us. Our mission is to improve the quality of life for all in the community. And when we look at what that means by all, it means making sure that all of our friends, family, and neighbors are involved with the foundation somehow. And so Heart and Soul is a way that we do that work. Personally, before I came to the foundation, I spent over 15 years at the University of Findlay in student affairs and student life. And about 6.5 years ago, I moved over to the foundation. And then I've been in this role for just under 2 years. And we often brag we have the very best jobs in Hancock County because our work is to do good and to make life better for so many others in our community. So thanks for having us.
Yeah, no, wonderful. Thank you. And I just want to say real briefly before we transition to Cassie, you mentioned beautiful Northwest Ohio, and of course, I'm also a resident of Findlay, and I feel like I'm home with you guys. And just to say that really, truly, the foundation is just highly respected in the community and in the county, and is doing amazing work. So just a vote of confidence there from me. Cassie?
Sure. I'm the Community Engagement Officer for the foundation with a lot of roles in reaching out to our rural communities as well as working with some grant opportunities. and doing professional development and organizational strengthening with our nonprofit organization. So that's my current role. Prior to my time with the foundation, just a short year and a half ago, I would have been a colleague of yours, Eric, as an extension professional. I was a 4-H youth development educator for OSU Extension for about 15 years. And really enjoyed that opportunity working with volunteers, developing young minds, as well as developing volunteers during that time. So it was a good fit to make the transition over to the foundation, where one of my roles here is serving as a coach for our Community Heart and Soul program, which the foundation supports and grants to local communities in our area.
Appreciate that. I go to the county fair. I always bump into you, Cassie. Extension still lives in you. I get the impression, right? And you're still volunteering with 4-H and as a leader. So so just appreciate you and your dedication to the foundation, to the work, but just to the community as a whole and to the next generation. So again, folks, we're blessed to have two amazing folks here with us today. So I think we'll take a little bit of time. I've got a few sort of questions at a moderated portion of this webinar, where I'll ask some questions. You can be thinking about what questions you might have, and you can drop those in the chat, or text them or send them to me, email them to me, what is convenient for you, and we'll work through some of those questions. And by the way, I will drop my contact information if you're listening in and this concept intrigues you. Community engagement and some of the methodologies is something I've been trained in, and feel free to if you want to follow up conversation, please do feel free to reach out to me, as well as my colleague Ambrose is here. So I guess you've mentioned already Community Heart and Soul, and so within the large family of community engagement practices, one of the most in-depth processes I've ever come across is Community Heart and Soul. But I'd be curious to know, Brian, just to kick this off, what is it the foundation, what is it that because you really drove driver in this, what is it that drew you to the model, and why is the foundation really kind of committed to engagement as a methodology?
Cassie, do you want to take a second and describe the model, and then I'll talk a bit about why Community Heart and Soul, why the foundation made that decision.
So go back several years, and the Orton Family Foundation really saw interest and passion and desire to help communities be able to work more effectively, involve more people, and from that, the Heart and Soul, Community Heart and Soul began. And with the Community Heart and Soul, there's 3 major elements. We want to make sure that everybody's participating, all those voices are being heard, and that we're playing the long game of whatever the community decides and wants to work towards. Is something that's not just put on the shelf, but it's their part of their action, part of their Community Heart and Soul statements of what they want to work towards, and it is included in part of their government or their local government moving forward. As working as Community Heart and Soul coaches, in a lot of different situations, it might be something that a village might hire somebody to come in and do a process for them. This is a different avenue in that we are there to work with them, but the volunteers, the group of individuals that comes together to be that core team for Community Heart and Soul, it is theirs to drive, and we are the folks that serve in that coach role are very much there as to help and to serve as that quote unquote football coach, and help direct their efforts and teach them. But it is theirs to learn, to take, to go forth and do. And I think that's the coolest thing about Community Heart and Soul, is that it really is involving everyone and in an area at the most basic line, whether it's volunteers serving to collect a story and find out data about what's most important to that community member, or organizing an event to share back what the data was showing, and continually building that platform of community engagement and buy-in and empowerment, and definitely moving away from doing something to them. So, the long-term big pictures of Community Heart and Soul is that the community, after doing a lot of data collecting, listening to everyone, making sure they're going back and they're not missing anyone, really even just looking at the demographics of their community, what voices might not being heard, continually being accessing that data and accessing those individuals to shape that big picture, and then creating their action statements or their community heart and soul statements of how they want to move forward and steward that process, and taking that data then and all that grid information and really using what's most important to them to move them forward. So whether that is developing their parks or applying for grant to help senior populations, whatever that community has decided is most important in their statements, and directing that.
Yeah, really important. I want to make sure I'm going to capture in the notes here. Can you remind us again those three sort of interlocking, priorities of this system?
Sure. We want to hear everybody, or make those voices heard. We want to and talk to everyone. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm having a moment. And engage everybody, and then play the long game.
So the next question is, okay, given this framework, why did the foundation want to engage in this effort? And when I think about 8 or so years ago, something that we noticed as a foundation was we serve all of Hancock County, but a vast majority of our grant making was done in the city of Findlay. And while there are nonprofits based in the city of Findlay that serve county residents, there just was a disconnect in the proportion of grant making. And then when we dug deeper, it was looking at that grant making and where was the high impact grant making? It was in the city of Findlay. We did some grants in the rural community, but it might be something like we would do a grant for a volunteer fire department to get axes. Great, it feels really good, it meets a need, but it was just that transactional relationship. We wanted something deeper. We wanted a bigger impact, a bigger relationship, and we wanted to maybe help those communities that are undergoing so much change go into the direction where it was maybe a little more positive change. So around that time, one of our program staff members was at a conference and met somebody from Community Heart and Soul. They started a conversation, and it took our board several years to get on board because we were the very first partner with Heart and Soul, and it was a big investment. And it was a big investment, not just financially, but also time and capacity wise. So it took us a little bit of time to get there. We had several goals, and I wrote them down so I wouldn't miss any. Deeper relationships with the rural community, learning the needs of the rural community. Instead of just seeing what was coming our direction with grant making and requests, it was really seeing in each of the unique communities in our county what those needs were. Third, increase the partners. Partners take a variety of forms, whether they be nonprofits, individuals, donors, all of those different people with whom a foundation can be connected, but increasing that in each of the villages throughout our county. And then finally, the most important was to move our grant making from transactional to transformational. And that piece was really critical. And so we're in our third community that we have been partnering with, and we've seen results in Macomb, which was our first community, Mount Blanchard, and then we expect to see those same results in Arlington. We're focusing on those three main things, involving the community and making sure that the foundation is a partner in this really important work in each of the villages.
Yeah, thank you for that context. Really helpful. Hopefully there's some communities listening in, but also hopefully maybe some community foundations listening in as well. I would love that. It's a different take that you bring to this, and I so appreciate it. So you know, you mentioned some of the communities that you've already worked in, including Macomb and Mount Blanchard. Cassie, I wonder if you could share a little bit about those stories, you know, and yeah, just share about those stories.
So you know what? Every community is unique, and I am going to toss this back to Brian because he was the active coach for Macomb and Mount Blanchard. I love working with our Mount Blanchard folks, and our Macomb, our friends are doing some great things, but he can share you some of the stories from those earlier days.
So I'll give the data from Mount Blanchard, and I think on our website you can see a copy of the community action plan that Mount Blanchard developed, and looking at that really shows kind of the whole process in Mount Blanchard, and it may be helpful for communities as they're considering it. So Mount Blanchard received a grant in 2017, and the foundation chooses to fully fund communities in this work. And I'll explain why probably a bit later. But some of the metrics, how they made this work in Mount Blanchard. Mount Blanchard has around 1,400 to 1,500 people. Their geographic area was Delaware Township, which is slightly larger than the village. I believe the village has somewhere around 400 to 500 residents, but they took it incredibly seriously. If you ever get the chance to meet the team, I can't say enough positive things about the team. They took every bit of guidance in the Community Heart and Soul program and took it to the next level. They said, we're just not going to complete it. We are going to nail it every single step of the way. And how that looked in Mount Blanchard, I have some stats. 125 events and meetings that either they planned or attended on behalf of Community Heart and Soul. They did over 200 individual interviews with community members. So when you think about 1,400 people, they individually interviewed 200 of them. And that resulted in 30 hours of recorded interviews that then they could use different places. Through those interviews, they developed their heart and soul statements, and their kind of 5 priority areas were business, local business, the parks and pool, small town living, activities, and the school. And so as part of the process, you think about, okay, those 5 areas that we collectively as a community agreed matter. They matter. So then we do this brainstorming activity with all of these different groups where it's, okay, let's take the schools. Where are the schools right now? Where do we want the schools to be? What's going to take us from here to there? And those are all identified as action ideas. And so they collected 673 action ideas on those 5 areas, which is huge. It's a huge number. But then they had meetings every Monday for several weeks where they vetted each and every one of those 673 ideas and decided, okay, which ones are most doable and would have the highest impact. And from there, they developed 37 ideas were fully developed where somebody or a team of people said, I will own this idea. And then they had a big community-wide event where they talked about their progress, and everybody received Mount Blanchard bucks, and they could vote on the ideas that they wanted to see come true. And that's where this came in. And I will brag on Mount Blanchard all day long. They were incredibly efficient in getting work done, and the work is still happening. So when you talk to folks from Mount Blanchard, the work is still happening 5 years later, and they have really, their village council decided as part of their planning process to take those 5 key areas and embed them in the work of their communities or community committees, and open those committees up to the entire community to make sure every single citizen's voice would be heard now into the future. So a lot of great work to be proud of.
That's fantastic. You know, well, when we've talked about it, you gave Brian just to stick on Mount Blanchard for just a minute, but I mean, I remember the story of just to kind of distill this down into, like, you know, an incident, right? I think of that restaurant that came out of this process. who was part of the listening and therefore, added some things that restaurants don't normally do because they want to be responsive to what it was just really, I don't know if you could be willing to share that story as an illustration of the larger impact that's been happening.
Well, I thought of a couple other stories, so I'll briefly share 3 stories, but I'm an academic, so brief is really, really tough. I'll share a Macomb story about a restaurant. So Macomb was our first community, and they started in 2015 with Heart and Soul, and recently a new restaurant is opening in town, and that new restaurant said, the only reason I'm opening up in Macomb is because of the data that you all collected, saying what you would support in a restaurant, which is so cool that even though it's been several years, that's something that they took away from it. 2 quick Mount Blanchard stories. Every time we work with a community, part of this work is looking at the census data and who really makes up your community. And every community I've worked with so far, the poverty number surprises folks. Because you really drill down into how many people in your community, however you define those borders, are in poverty and are in deep poverty. And then you take it, if it's 10%, then you think, oh gosh, that means in every group that I'm part of, 1/10 of the people are in poverty, and what that means. And then we go further, what that actually means in real life. What struggles could people have? And when we plan events, are there barriers that we are putting up, not addressing some of these potential obstacles? And food security was something that Mount Blanchard really picked up on, that idea of hunger. So now they have 2 food pantries, one located in a church and one realizing that some folks may have a different relationship with faith, one that's in the village building, so that there are 2 places for people to get food. And at the beginning of the pandemic, because of what they had learned about their community, they had a focus on food. And they had several people who don't want me to share who they are, so I'll respect that, step up right away and said, we want to make sure that our neighbors are being fed. So they provided food options very early on, knowing that finances may make it challenging for folks to have food. That is, in my mind, one of the most important wins from the community, is you realize that there are folks that have different needs. And really, one of the best parts about living in a small town is people come together, and it's coming together in a different way, in a deeper way. My other favorite story about Mount Blanchard is how they've kept this alive. I think the biggest tangible item that they've come up with is they wanted to make sure that after Heart and Soul, the formal Heart and Soul process ended, that there was always a way for citizens to be engaged. So their village council and village administration came up with a flow chart to distribute on how an idea can become a reality. So if your idea is about the parks, here's who to go to, and here's the process it would follow. Like, that's powerful. And that is big change. That's capital C change that for the foreseeable future, anybody in the village can look and say, okay, I can make a difference. What I do, the idea that I have, can come true. And I think that that's powerful in any community that you live in.
Yeah, thank you so much for those stories. I couldn't help but in my head, I was thinking of, what was that old, how a law becomes a bill, or that old.
Yeah. The Schoolhouse Rock.
Schoolhouse Rock, yeah.
We need a Schoolhouse Rock video, but about how does an idea become an action item or whatever.
That's funny.
So anyways, but I know, just really appreciate those all 3 of those stories. I feel like with a process like this, what I'm hearing is it's almost like there's a change in just how we function. It's not just it's not just a new upgrade to a park or whatever, but the underlying sort of social infrastructure has been changed in the process, and that helps perpetuate. So because we got to learn how to always keep improving, right? If we're ever going to achieve the goal of prosperity for all. And this process does that or can do that. And so I'd like to maybe go to that question, right? We hear these success stories sometimes as a small community, and it's like, or a community of any kind, and it's like, so they made that happen, you know, great, you know, but then we feel deflated because we don't realize that everybody's got challenges. And so I wonder if you could say a little bit about what, you know, what are some of the challenges that communities face when they're going through a process like this?
So I think one of the big challenges that we need to put out there is that community engagement is hard work, right? And the people on this call know that better than anybody else. Community change is a lot of work. It's about taking the time to build the relationships, to get to know people, and the time and the emotional piece as well, because you sometimes uncover things that are challenging, or you uncover rifts from years and years ago that are still, there are symptoms of things that are still happening. I think we don't acknowledge, it looks really good on paper, but we don't always recognize the blood, sweat, and tears that it takes to get there. And I think something you mentioned a little bit ago is that when you try to make change in a community, that means that existing systems are challenged. And especially if you're doing community change where you're looking at unheard and underheard voices, that kind of makes people feel uncomfortable. Like if I lose my influence, or if somebody else gains influence, then I lose influence. Where there is enough room, there's no finite amount of influence that exists, or there's no finite amount of involvement. So it's breaking some of those perceptions that in order to change, it means I have less. Where there's plenty of resources for everybody to have a say, for everybody to be engaged in setting the table. All of those things, it's possible. It's possible. It just takes intentionality and it takes time. Cassie, what are you seeing?
I think sometimes change is scary. So as much as folks are wanting to step up and do something different, stepping out of that norm of where we are and taking it to that next level, change can be scary. And that kind of leads to that same things you were talking about. And the other thing is just, you know, it's a process and it's a long process. So it's that continuously keeping everybody accountable and accountable to each other, not accountable to me, not accountable to the coaches, but accountable to each other as they are proceeding through this process. And that sometimes not fun conversations are going to be happening, and maintaining how we work together and build consensus, but also are able to work through situations where we probably won't always agree on everything, and having those hard conversations are what's going to help us come out over on the other side with that better Mount Blanchard, better Arlington that we're all hoping for. And I think that can be some of those challenges of her feelings, of you know, just different pieces and parts that can be happening, but it's all part of that process, which is a very healthy thing, especially in today's society, for folks to have the opportunity to practice.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, and it feels like with a deep process like Community Heart and Soul, or you know, these tools, I mean, what I like is you're connecting it to sort of those underlying values of the community, the collective values. And it feels like that's what helps to sustain us through those harder times to get to that change that we're looking for, right? Because you know, you could have an external, you can have a lot of community will use an external consultant, and hey, great for them. Who come and say this is what you should do, but it's not connected to the community and what that collective voice is, or what the underlying values are that will help sustain us through to push through those hard challenges. I don't know, am I reading that right?
I think community pride is a huge benefit and a huge step or hurdle on both sides of when we're talking about heart and soul. You know, from that perspective of community pride, we want our community to be the very best that we can. From that perspective of community pride, what do you mean our community is not the very best? It is. And how do you navigate that and help folks that are seeing both sides of that and where improvements could happen and where identifying those points of pride that we really do want to maintain and grow and thrive, and then what other things and what other processes can we do to work together to be successful to take us to that next step. I think one of the coolest statements I heard out of our Arlington folks so far is one of the local business people. She's part of this community and she are part of the committee, and her very much her standing of is she's made an investment to have a business and to open a business in Arlington. So she very much wants this kind of process to succeed and do what it needs to do because it's beneficial for the community, which is beneficial for her business, which is, you know, that whole cycle. And that's exciting stuff to see small businesses starting and thriving in small communities again.
Yeah, and building off of that, one of the reasons they started this model was Lyman Norton said, you know, small towns are on the decline nationwide, and there has to be some way to address this. And what they found is that when people, change is hard, and communities, especially small towns, have seen so much change. They used to be able to meet all of their needs in the village, and now that's not possible. So change is hard, but change is a little easier when it's rooted in what everybody collectively agrees on matters. So when you think about that change, you're like, oh, this change will help this one thing that we all have said we care about. That makes it a little easier. And I think that involvement makes it better because you're able to say, I have a stake in this. I have my input helped get here. So I can get behind this. Might be a little uncomfortable, but I know why we're having it happen. I can get behind it better.
Great, thank you for that, for adding that. You know, just maybe a pause for a second too. There's some mechanics here to this that I think even in our conversation before starting on this piece, there's a key role that needs to happen, and that's that coordinator role. That's one key ingredient of this. And I wonder if that's a challenge that you see with a lot of communities. I mean, there's a commitment of time and resources a community needs to put into this if they're going to see this through. Can you talk a little bit about those mechanics that are really critical for a process like this?
So I think when we start thinking about the nuts and bolts of Heart and Soul, you know, there's different ways that different communities are going to approach it. Hancock County is going to be approaching it, especially with the foundation's role, differently than other communities are. But very much having that buy-in for the community, that there's a core leadership group that is stepping up and ready to take on this effort and involve everyone and understand what this process is. From the nuts and bolts of it, from a foundation perspective, for being a funder for this, helping communities understand that it's a process and not a project. You know, that we're going to be working through this, and down the road something physical might come from it. But right now we are really truly working on what matters most to all of you and what action do we want to take from that. So being on the same page, having a dedicated group of folks, figuring out, you know, it's not a free process. So how are you going to fund it? Understanding who's all in your community. So some of the getting started activities that Heart and Soul provides is a great way to see, you know, doing kind of a community analysis of where folks feel like they are. Are they ready? Is there capacity to do something like this? Not every community is going to have the capacity. We've been really fortunate and blessed that our communities have stepped up and, you know, really looked at all the different angles that we'll take and understand going in, maybe not fully, but understand that it is a time, energy, treasure of their talents and skills, and constantly recruiting folks to be able to accomplish this. So when you're looking at all of those different pieces and parts and understanding that you're going to need technical people, you're going to need people, you're going to need all these different relationship building folks, story gatherers, data processing people, you know, it's not just building a community or building a committee. It's building a vibrant, functioning small business team for a while of the different pieces and parts. So that understanding and really digging into the getting started activities that are provided by Heart and Soul, I think starts some of the foundation work that's just essential to be moving forward and having a good positive outcome. And it might very well not be what you think is going to happen, but that's how we learn and grow. Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think people are surprised at the mechanics of it because they just want to go talk to their friends and family and neighbors. But to get to that stage, there are a series of steps, and Community Heart and Soul has some really interesting materials that might be helpful to, are you ready for something like Heart and Soul? But it's a long process, and I think people are surprised, especially at the beginning, how much behind the scenes work it takes to get ready for that launch.
What kind of time frame were we talking?
Well, I'd say the communities, most of the communities that apply are, once they find out and or start putting together, you're talking months of just kind of getting themselves organized to apply. Another month or so once just continually getting folks involved, right? Like 2 or 3 people decide that this is super important. That's great, but they've got to get the buy-in and the support of more than just 2 or 3 people, because you're not going to be successful. Because it is looking at those different circles of influence and connections, and how are we going to connect everybody to be part of this, so that it's not the same 10 people that always show up, and expanding those circles out.
Yeah, and I think overall it's around 2-ish years. I use ish because depending on the team, it could be longer, it could be a little shorter also.
Yeah, and you mentioned the foundation's role. Can you say a little bit about that? I mean, what do you add to the mix?
So go ahead, sorry.
Oh, no, please. Okay, so for our foundation, our example, and every foundation who partners with Heart and Soul does it a little bit different. Our goal is to provide full funding. So we provide a grant for the 2 years, but then also our foundation provides the coach. So part of our commitment outside of the funding is that providing Cassie as the coach, working with the community, some communication support, some other support through the foundation. But our goal is to make sure that they feel us supporting them in the work. It's not us doing the work. They're the ones doing the work. They need to feel that we support them and are behind them 100% as they go through the journey.
It's very much a walking with somebody process. And I think that's what most of our communities have appreciated, is that we are there as an active partner, but it's their process and we're there to be that partner.
Yeah, that's great. I do want to note, as we move forward, I've put some links in the chat. You can check those out. The Community Foundation link. And I also added the link to the specific page that says Community Heart and Soul, where you can download that where you can watch on the videos, but you can also download the document from Mount Blanchard that Brian, you were referencing.
Thank you.
But also included in there is the Community Heart and Soul link. And the last one I put in there just now was a link to, they even have some seed grants of $10,000 that you can apply for, just to get the ball rolling and have a little bit of beginning resources to get started. And I will note that Central State University, through the Cooperative Extension Service, we can provide some of the coaching, as Cassie referenced, that we can provide some of that along your journey as well. We're here to serve. Yeah. So you mentioned there's a new community coming on, and that puts me in the mindset of when I was early into community development, someone pulled me aside and give me a formula, and that formula said, change equals or happens. C equals change happens when you have the motivation to change, motivation to act, right? So the M, plus vision, V, the vision for the preferred future, and then also plus K, and K stands for knowledge of the first step. And he said you got to have those pieces in place in order for change to happen. And I wonder if you could help us out with that K, right? So if a community is listening in, or a community foundation is listening in, but what's that knowledge of the first step, right? So what are those early things that people can do to kind of be taking on this kind of a process?
So I think one of the great resources is the Community Heart and Soul website. There's a lot of different videos that folks can find out what the impacts were in other communities. Always being aware that every community is unique and what your outcomes may look differently. Then there's also a lot of different supporting material, getting started activities that you can take, that anybody, and are written very well, that you can take and go and work with a group to explore it a little deeper, to start finding out what kind of interest and engagement you're going to be seeing with that. And I think those are some of the strong pieces that Community Heart and Soul as an organization provides, as well as just that wealth of over 100 communities that are currently or have participated in this, and the folks that are there to help brainstorm, guide, and think about that process. So I think anybody getting started, that's your best place to, in my opinion, to start, is at their website.
And if you are from a foundation, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We can share our journey with you. We've talked to some other foundations who have an interest. Share everything possible as you're considering if this might be a possible match for your foundation.
Great, thank you so much. We'll be opening up in a second for questions, or in case we have Crystal, Amber, and Ambrose here with us, colleagues in the extension. If you would like to unmute yourself, please feel free to just kind of jump in with your questions. We'll get started with that, or drop them in the chat and we'll ask them off that, whatever's convenient for you. But if you could, you already shared with us kind of a critical resource, and that's the website for Community Heart and Soul. I've dropped that in the chat. And again, there's lots of resources on there. And so go get yourself familiar. But are there other resources that you'd like to point us to that might be helpful for communities?
I think it's always helpful to look at the census data for your community to truly know who's in your community. A lot of times our knowledge is limited to those with whom we interact. So people who are, friends, people who are families, there's so much more to a community. So that census data is really important. And there are a couple different ways that shows up. But census, like census.gov, is one of those ways that you can see who is part of your community. So regardless of if you do a big effort or a small effort, you can make sure that you're talking to people in your community, all different kinds of folks that make up the individuals in your community.
I think too, when you're thinking about that census data too, is really thinking about the geographic location. For the example of Arlington, there's Arlington, the village, but they're also looking at their school district, which represents 5 townships. So what's those 5 townships make up in addition to their community when they're thinking of that big picture? Mount Blanchard was very much the same. So when we're talking about our rural communities, a lot of times while tied to a village's name, it's very much the school district or, the different, however they map that out. So thinking about that perspective, what does that map actually look like for your community? I always give the example of when we're trying to think about where people relate to or where they feel like where they're from. If somebody asked me, I would tell you I'm from Waynesfield. I'm a Waynesfieldian. I never lived in Waynesfield a day in my life, but I went to high school. I mean, that was K through 12 there. So that was my education, and that was my friend group, and that was the place that I'm from is Waynesfield. But the family farm's 5 miles out, and everybody's got where you relate to, where you tie into for your community and what you relate to. And I think that's an important piece too of making sure if you are going to be thinking about tackling or taking on Community Heart and Soul, what truly makes up your community.
That's true. Ambrose, you and I, you and I think a lot alike because I see in the chat you had the main questions that I wanted to ask. So since you already are asking that question for them to answer, excuse me, I just wanted to make a comment, Brian, when you talked about the relationships and when you're dealing with communities, a lot of times you have that 5 to 10 strong. And I'm glad that you put a timeline to it so people know that this is an ongoing project. It's not just a quick shot in the dark and say, hey, okay, we got 10 people. And sometimes those 10 people fluctuate. So you have 10 altogether, but every month is a different set of 10, right? Different
Right.
composition. So don't get frustrated when that happens. That just means the word is getting out. Life happens. But the more people you have touch points with, it starts to build up over time. So I just wanted to say, it was refreshing to hear that.
Thank you.
And I just had the question concerning what interaction have you all had, or through the Heart and Soul program with the Cooperative Extension Service? Obviously, prior to meeting up with us and through Eric, it would have been the Ohio State University Cooperative Extension Service. What interaction has there been, or if there has been, and then what role would you see extension playing in that sort of ecosystem or that process?
So I'll start, Cassie. Then you have a lot more experience in this than I do. To my knowledge, in the first two communities, there was very little direct experience between cooperative extension and Heart and Soul. Direct meaning organization to organization. Now, with individuals involved, there was quite a few, because small towns, everybody knows everybody, or at least hypothetically we do. But there was a lot of interaction where they might have attended meetings, but not in their role as an extension agent, but in their role as a community member. So as far as I know, very little formal interaction.
I would say, because during the first two communities I was working for OSU Extension, when we're thinking about the different program areas and what was going on, it was, organized to that community. So, you might see 4-H clubs participating in the parades and different things that Macomb was organizing for some of their activities and events. Hancock County at the time did not have a community development educator, so there wouldn't have been a direct link there. And we were kind of ebbing and flowing through our family consumer science educators at those times too. Now, from the coach perspective, I do think there's more than a couple of us that do have extension backgrounds, because it does speak to the nature of the roles, right? That we want to engage communities, we want to develop kids, we want to develop our people and relationships, so that's a natural fit. I think as extension folks would find out more about this, if it worked if it made sense in their plan of work, it makes sense in their plan of work. So there's definitely opportunities. Whether there's been direct need, I think probably most parts, at least in our community, they've been functioning, that the comparisons or pulling together wasn't necessarily a need of that community at that time. They were accessing extension services, or they were accessing and working with Community Heart and Soul together, but in separate formats, if that makes sense.
Okay. And I guess a part of the reason I ask about it also is that when we talk about the community planning and our CED team, my sort of focus or passion is on, we educate and start pulling the community together, but helping them to sort of start putting that actual infrastructure in place to really grow, which would be if they need to form a formal co-op, or if they need to form some businesses or nonprofit organizations that are some actual additional infrastructure that they're going to organize and operate through to implement those ideas and plans. And I just think that that's one role that extension can play, across the state, because we can take that information, that education out to them. So I was just wondering if there had been.
So I think that kind of falls in the category of, and this is sometimes we've said this is, extension's the best kept secret, and some of the resources that are able to be offered there. From that perspective, that's always something to think about, who's going to be the connector. And that's what we talk a lot about in Heart and Soul, is who's those connectors. So from an extension perspective, whether it's being involved because you're part of that community might be how that connection happens, but where does connections happen? Where does that knowledge base begin, and how do you open the doors and for folks to know that that's a possible service if they're not actively reaching out? Now, as they're developing community action statements, lots of, especially Macomb did a lot of grant writing and was able to bring in some dollars, and it was accessing different state level stuff. So, there's different avenues, and every community is different. And, across the state or across the United States, there's community Heart and Soul that, planning going and villages happening. We're just talking about the 3 examples in Hancock County at this point.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, so this wasn't part of the intent of today, but but Cassie, you've met Amber and Ambrose and Crystal, and so just to say, I mean, these are folks that can really, when you feel like you have those with your new community, you have those you have some direction that the community wants to go in. They have done so much. I mean, you got 60 decades probably on the bench of in this bench of working with businesses and working on infrastructure projects, and how do you develop that business district or the downtown, or
Sure.
so just say it's available to you. One thing I did, I think Crystal has a question coming up, but one thing I did want to note for those listening in, I know we've been talking a lot about Community Heart and Soul. Go to the website, learn about it. There's some tools you can use regardless of whether or not you adopt it as a full-on process. But you might feel like you're not, maybe you're an organization, you just want to do more community engagement as an organization, you're not doing that as a community, or maybe you're listening in and you look at Community Heart and Soul and just that's too big of a reach for right now to go through a guided process that requires that intense level of coaching and support through the process. I just want to make sure that if that's your case, you have resources that are available to you outside of that. And so hopefully this pace is okay. So in the chat, I've got a link to, these are just resources that I found interesting in this space. They got checklists. I mean, the kinds of the spread of engagement processes is vast. And so they've really outlined, the different ways you could take this. And in Community Heart and Soul, we talk about there's thick varieties, right? And there's thin. It can be something as simple as what's a piece of our chalkboard somewhere in the community that says, let's be a better place when ... and people could just come in, jot down a note or something. To the deep engagement where you're doing one-on-one conversations and documenting, those conversations. So, but that entire spread is included in that series of workbooks, field guides that I've dropped in that link. So just a free resource that's just out there that's available to you. Okay. With that, Crystal asks, Crystal's just appreciating, again, she has to take a call, but wanted to appreciate your time today. And we're coming close up on time. Any last questions or thoughts, feedback, Amber or Ambrose?
It's just nice to be connected with some like-minded community development folks, right? And just look forward to future opportunities to work with you and see how the resources that we do have available can help augment the great work that you all are doing.
Yeah, I would echo the sentiments expressed there by Amber, and I guess as I listen to the discussion today, and just thinking things over, it's you know so like Cassie, when you talk about those connectors, it's how do we facilitate more of that connection where communities and groups reach out to extension. I mean, like you're saying, this is the best kept secret, and that is one of the challenges that we have as a new extension service. Um, we're based, or the university is in Wilberforce, and so many people around the state don't know anything about Central State University. And so to say that we have a presence in, or that we serve 60 plus counties, we're serving counties, territories that don't know we exist. so that is sort of that challenge. Um, yeah, that is just sort of that challenge. It's a challenge.
And I feel that, right? I mean, that's even from the OSU perspective, we would call down to campus and be like, there's extension? What is extension? So yeah, it's always being that, being that proponent and figuring out ways to get the word out and figuring out those partnerships. And I think that's one of the things that has been cool about Community Heart and Soul, is that it really makes that community look at what all does it have. When Arlington started brainstorming out and working on the community network analysis, they were up to over 100 businesses, entities, and groups for little 1,500 people Arlington area that they're serving. So it really can be surprising, and building those links, and then what outside of that community resources make sense to tap into. And that might be the next step of when you're working and brainstorming with groups, is it's not only thinking about the internal and who we want to talk to and who lives, works, and plays here, but who do we interact with on that outside circle that we want to make sure we're involving. And that makes sense when we're thinking about organizations such as your own.
Cassie and Brian, I wanted to say thank you. I'm Crystal. I didn't get a chance to speak. I don't know what I missed during the phone call, but I do want to say thank you. Again, one of the things that excites me the most about this is just the ability, like I believe, Brian, you were speaking about how small communities are starting to dwindle away, or just the disappearance of small communities. And me not being, I'm from a large city, right? I'm from Detroit, Michigan, but coming here to Ohio and being placed in 10 counties and those regions, and there are small cities there, knowing that there is an organization that actually is involved with revitalizing small cities. I'm excited to learn how to partner with you all. And on top of CED, working with CED, being Team CED, and really loving the knowledge that all three of these team members, Amber, Ambrose, and Eric, bring is incredible. So I just wanted to say thank you. I don't have any questions. I'm just a fly on the wall, but I did want to at least speak and say thank you for this, because this is very enriching for me.
Well, and thank you for the work that you all do. Community engagement and community development is crucial. And it's hard work in the roles that you play in helping guide communities in that work is really important. So thank you for the work that you do. It's often, I'm assuming, as thankless as many other roles, but thank you. It makes a difference.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Brian. Yeah, and just to add to Crystal, just to have my thanks and my gratitude to the both of you, Brian and Cassie, for being with us. And thanks to everybody that's been listening in. I did drop one more resource. The team knows me. I just throw stuff out there, right? So USDA, the Extension Service is funded in large part by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA. There is an agency, there's a lot of agencies within USDA, but one of them is called Rural Development. And so if you're listening in, if you're a city or a town of 50,000 or less, you will qualify for most of their programs. They do have a series of products that might be useful to you. So if you've gone through the engagement and process, some kind of planning process, and you've reached that point where hey, we want a new station for our fire department. Okay, well, they got a facilities program designed for that. Okay. Or you might say, yeah, it's business is our way back to prosperity or revitalization. And what our local businesses need in our town is access to capital. Well, guess what? They've got a product where you can apply to get a loan from the USDA, rural development, that you can then loan out to your business community. So there's a variety of products. So I just would recommend USDA rural development might be a good resource for you. And of course, every community is working on housing issues. That's a huge part of what they do as well. And so they got a variety of products there. So just one more resource.
Yeah, they do a lot more than just agriculture for
Thank
the
you.
rural community. So that would be an excellent resource for you guys.
Well, we're at time, and so I want to say again, thank you everyone for being with us for this edition of Office Hour Live. We welcome you to come back next week, and we'll be talking with, we'll be engaging in the story of Bellefontaine and their revitalization. And so, we were really exploring today, how do you get people mobilized and dreaming and acting and, connecting to their values, finding priorities. Bellefontaine, so that's sort of like the human side of community development, right? Is capturing that. A big piece of community economic development is, okay, what do you do with the physical infrastructure, and how do you marry that human energy that you've collected with the physical built infrastructure, and so with downtown development. So they're going to talk with us about that, and we'll be hearing from Jason Duff with Small Nation. They've been so successful that now they're coaching and training communities nationwide. And so you really want to key in on that and hear that story. It'll be really impactful. So thank you everyone for being with us. Thank you once again, Brian and Cassie. Really appreciate you taking time to do this. For those of you that don't know, they've been up since like 5 this morning getting ready for board meetings. So that they graced us with their presence is a treasure. So thank you. And thank you to everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.